Welcome to BNEWS Special Report, Year in Review 2020-22 with our guest Paul Sagarino, who has graciously and has always graciously accepted our invites to come and talk about town issues and town events. Welcome, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Phil. I enjoy this every year, and it's year goes by quickly, so it seems like yesterday we were doing the last one.
It's been quite an eventful couple of years. Paul is in his 4th year as the Burlington Town Administrator and his 17th year overall as Town Administrator and Assistant Town Administrator. So let's start with first full year after the lockdown. How would you characterize our recovery and the events that took place during and following the lockdown for Burlington?
I really feel like the town, if you think about the biggest impacts from COVID, was the impact on our economics in the businesses in the community. I think that the town has showed itself to be remarkably resilient in many ways. We certainly still have businesses and industries that are suffering, and we still have some concerns as we move forward. But I think overall, I'm very grateful for how the town has been able to respond, not just the town itself, but also the business community has been able to respond in light of the difficult few years that we've had here due to the pandemic.
In retrospect, well, I just briefly mentioned that from a health standpoint, it seemed to be you were the one person who in town government who was most severely impacted by COVID. How are you feeling now?
I'm still not yet recovered. It was over a year ago, so I'm one of the COVID long haulers and still have some impacts from it, but I can't complain. You know, there's so many people that deal with so many more difficult things, even within our community, that, you know, I'm very, very happy for where I'm at, and, you know, I try not to think about it as we move forward, and it's quite an experience, and, you know, I learned a lot from it, and again, I really don't have much to complain about at this point. I'm still being treated and everything, but I'm very comfortable and happy with you know, my recovery so far.
How would you characterize the operation or the performance of the departments as we proceeded through the pandemic in terms of still providing services? What measures were taken to, for instance, segregate players so that we always had somebody who was on staff in the various departments?
I got to tell you, Phil, I couldn't be prouder than the way our employees were able to deal with the pandemic. From what I could see, services continued straight through, even through the darkest 30 days of the pandemic when the whole world was shut down. Our employees were here providing services, albeit on a limited basis to the community, but there's some things that just have to be done no matter the conditions, and I'm very proud of how our employees responded and dealt with that in order to overcome their own fear and the difficult situation and still be able to understand how important that the town is in terms of providing services. You know, if a water main breaks, someone has to fix the water main. We have police and fire going into people's homes to assist them. And again, at a time when people were uncertain just how deadly the virus was and what the impact could have been to them personally. And we took a lot of steps to protect the employees as well, try to prevent illness within our shifts, because under the COVID rules, if one person gets it, you could lose an entire shift of people that would have to go home and not be able to come to work. So, you know, we did some adjusting of the shifts and adjusting of the practices and the way we did business to try to keep the employees safe as well. For their own health, as well as just being able to staff operations. We have to be here, and again, overall, I'm extremely proud of our employees and the way that they dealt with the pandemic.
Now let's talk about finances, recovering from the pandemic and going forward. You just set the tax rate for next fiscal year. How did we come out of the pandemic in terms of revenue stream? I know local option taxes were dramatically affected. How did we come out in terms of a budget deficit, budget surplus? Where was the OPEB account? Where was the long-term, I forget what the name of that.
Stabilization?
Stabilization account, yes. And free cash. I know that during that period of time you had advocated conservancy. How has that worked out? Where do we stand at this point?
You know, one of the blessings and the curse of the pandemic is we were unable to spend a lot of budget money on certain things that we would normally do. You know, if you think about recreation and council on aging, there was a lot of money that was budgeted but was not spent just because we couldn't have gatherings, we couldn't run programs that we would normally run because of the social distancing and the other measures that we were taking as a community. So believe it or not, it was actually beneficial in some ways from a financial situation. The state did provide us some funding from the federal government through CARES, which was very helpful to us. We recently got another tranche of funding for ARPA, which we can talk about on a separate segment there. But overall, I think the town ended up very well. We have over $11 million in stabilization. The OPEB trust fund continues to grow. I think we have $10 or $11 million in there. And free cash this year, partially due to the fact that we couldn't spend money, and partially due to the fact that we were very conservative in spending money over the past 3 years. You know, free cash was set at an all-time high this past year at approximately 25 million.
25 million.
Yeah, the most recent number. So.
Good Lord, somebody would be wanting to spend that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But that's not a bad problem to actually have the money in hand to do necessary projects that the town wants to do.
Now, you set the tax rate, and one of my concerns during the course of COVID was that ultimately when we return to normal, that there would be a substantial decline in our commercial industrial properties as a result of work at home, et cetera. Now, this will be an ongoing process over 3 years as leases roll off. Yes. What was the first year impact in terms of the CIP, commercial industrial properties, versus residential property values?
Values in both categories, Phil, continue to rise. I know that may be a surprise to some folks. We were able to maintain the historical shift. For the folks at home, the shift is how much of the residential tax burden that we shift onto the commercial. We were at about a 1.67 shift is what they call it. And
now that's called tax classification.
Tax classification. So we were able to maintain our historical numbers there. And we're very grateful because we do have some flexibility there. If things were to get worse, that we would be able to offset some of the burden to the residents. So we're very conservative in everything that we do financially. And, you know, we're very pleased with what's going on. We have some great businesses moving to town, some very impressive life science businesses. We really have a very diverse economy here, and we're very grateful for that. And we continue to try to nourish that. You know, we're not just looking for life science, research and development. We have great technology base in town, medical device companies. We were able to attract a few corporate headquarters during the pandemic, and I think that that's a real testament to all the work that's been done by previous generations just to foster a great environment for businesses to want to be here. We do share your concern about office space in general. I think everybody knows with the work from home has sort of been a game changer. We haven't seen all of the impacts of that yet, but clearly I think anyone in town that drives around would see much fewer cars in the parking lots at our office buildings here. Some of them will probably transition to different types of spaces as we move forward. But the real trick will be in the next 3 to 5 years, as you mentioned, as leases come up for renewal. But to this point, our landlords report that their tenants are paying their leases in full, so we got great tenants in town. But you know, we do expect that there'll be not necessarily a shrinkage, but maybe I think what they call it is a right sizing of office space. You know, they'll be set up more under the hoteling kind of thing with shared office spaces where employees can get together and collaborate a couple days a week, as opposed to everybody having their own cubicle and reporting to the office every day. So we're definitely cautiously optimistic. We do have a ton of great office space in town, so it's something we're monitoring very closely.
Now, there's two potential softer spots. One would be bricks and mortar in the retail business, and secondly, we've made a headlong rush into the restaurant business. Both of those, and the hotel business, haven't rushed into that. We've had them. Those are particularly important components to the local options tax. They had taken a severe hit during the pandemic. How are they recovering, and how do you anticipate, for instance, the restaurant business being affected by what is likely to be not necessarily severe recession, but a recession brought on by Fed raises?
A little bit of a tale of two businesses there, Phil. Our hotel industry is definitely continues to suffer. You know, business travel isn't just what it used to be. I know that many of the hotels there in town have cut back on their services. You know, they're not holding conferences. They can't get the staff to have functions and events and things of that nature, which they use to survive. Our hotels historically have been very high occupancy rates, you know, during the week in particular with business travel. And they continue to suffer. The meals tax is down about 50%. It's probably the biggest revenue loss and concern that we've had through the pandemic. Now, on the other hand, our meals tax just reached an all-time high this past year.
Okay, your hotel tax is down 50.
Hotel's down 50.
Meal taxes.
Meals tax is actually up, on its way up. It's important to note, is that a function of just having more restaurants, more expensive food?
Plus, you can't seem to get a seat. I mean, I'm a gray hair, so I go early, but I had made reservations at 6 o'clock, and it was, we went to a place at 6 o'clock. It was an hour wait, so we switched to 5 o'clock, and it was a 45-minute wait. So
yeah, I mean, we have some great restaurants here, and Burlington has become a food mecca within the state of Massachusetts. But despite the fact that the meals tax are up, our restaurants are still dealing with some very difficult times. Everybody knows they can't get staff. Wages have gone way up, which is a good thing for the workers, but makes it harder to retain employees. Food costs are up now. So despite the fact that from the town standpoint, our meals tax being up, I do believe the restaurant segment is definitely suffering in their own ways as well.
Now let's go back to the tax rate. What is the process? You set the tax rate for the fiscal year 2023, or we're in 2023 right now?
We're in 2023 now.
Fiscal year.
The town fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th, unlike a normal. So it takes a little while to get used to the dating system. But so we're about halfway through fiscal year 2023, which will end on June 30th. The select board recently set the tax rate for this current year.
Right, and the split was $990 $1,000 for residential, and 1.67 of that to CPI was 16.65, I think.
It's way higher than that. It's in the 20s on the commercial rate,
is.
But that is fairly consistent with our competition. So that's the difficult thing that the board has to do there, is balance the needs of the residents versus trying not to price out the commercial community. We are in competition with the Walthams and the Lexingtons and the Woburns, so we have to be conscious of both of those tax rates, and I think we do a good job of splitting the difference there to make us a competitive place for businesses to be. But I think, as we all know, and the residents get a great deal on taxes. Not to say that your tax bill going up on your kitchen table isn't a burden to anybody, because it's definitely a burden anytime any bill goes up. But I think if people were to look at it objectively to what their house would be taxed in a different community, a neighboring community, there's really no comparison in terms of the tax bill versus the level of services that the town is able to provide.
So the median house value right now is $640, something in that
Yeah, it's
order?
right in the 640,
and the
650
raise
range.
is, in the taxes is likely to be
221, I think, on the
221.
average home. So if you have a more expensive home, it'll go up more than that, or at least less expensive home, it'll be less than that. But very, very competitive for the region, and you know, our only competition in terms of the average tax bill really is Woburn, and I think Billerica is actually moving up. They used to be pretty close with where we are too, but no comparison to the other communities, the Lexingtons, the Belmonts, the Reddings, and Tewksbury's and whatnot.
Well, the resident expects that based on what the burden we have of commercial, industrial, et cetera, but that's another matter. So the process now is you'll be meeting with the financial team, school department, Ways and Means, and establishing guidelines. Explain the budget guidelines going forward for 2024.
Yep, we typically have a meeting with all the important elected boards in town just to try to develop a joint strategy in terms of what we're able to spend, what type of tax, how much we'll be able to increase the tax levy, and just try to come up with a plan that's fair to all, fair to the taxpayers, but also provides the funding for our departments, the school department, rec, DPW, police, just to be able to maintain and provide the same level of services that the residents have, come to enjoy.
Now, their budget constraints as a result of 2.5, which 2.5 essentially is 2.5% rise. However, there's a component of there for growth which can be added to the budget. How does that work?
So we have a limitation set by Proposition 2.5. Based upon the current numbers, we are $12 million in tax levy below the limit imposed by Prop 2.5, which basically makes it more difficult for us because we would have to spend a lot of money in the upcoming year for Proposition 2.5 to factor in. So that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult, and that we have the ability to tax much more than we do.
Because of the growth component that we've added on over the years.
Correct. Any new growth, whether it's a deck on somebody's house or a new office building, adds to the Proposition 2.5 tax levy, adds to our tax base. And again, it is really tricky. I talk to people in other communities, and I try to tell them it's more difficult to budget when you have that capacity, because there's a lot of
Competing interests.
Competing interests that want to use the tax capacity. And as the administration, we try to be very conservative. We're still able to provide, the town provides us with very generous funding for our departments. And we don't want to make light of that. We need to be very reasonable as we move forward to try to maintain that financial capability that we have. I mean, that's a great reserve here. If we had an emergency, the town could vote to spend $12 million more this year if they wanted to, before we even have to deal with Proposition 2.5. And we're very conscious of that, because that makes Burlington very unique from a financial standpoint. There's very few communities in Massachusetts that have it as good as we have it from a tax-based standpoint, and we want to be very responsible in how we utilize that.
Right. Now let's go on to municipal borrowing. The Fed has been very aggressive. I think we've had 3 75 basis point raises in the Fed funds rate. On Wednesday, they raised another 50 basis points, which is good for a saver. For instance, you can get almost a 4% on a 5-year, 10-year treasury. CD rates are going up. It's bad news for municipal borrowing. Our 10-year capital plan, I think, includes about $150 million in borrowing, not including any high school work.
Yeah, I think it's probably much more than that, Phil. But
Okay.
At the same time, we budget like everything we do. We build conservatism in. So I believe that our bonding schedule that we work off as a projection, I think we use 3.5%, 4% interest rates. So,
Which they haven't reached that.
right,
yet,
we've
municipal bonding.
We've been able to borrow for far less than that, and all that does, when we're able to do so, is free up capacity as we move forward within what we can borrow.
But we've actually refinanced during the low interest rate period prior to the pandemic, for instance.
Yeah, anytime we have a chance, typical to a home mortgage, if the rates go down, we can refinance our debt under certain circumstances. And again, we've taken every opportunity to do so. So we're as prepared as we could be. But you raise a great point that as we move forward, we got some big projects. The Fox Hill School is next up on the list, followed by a police station, and we will be paying more money on our borrowing interest rates as we move forward.
As well as
and it does have an
costs,
impact.
yeah.
Construction costs.
We got 10 sewer pumping stations that have to be refurbed over the coming years.
Well, believe it or not, Phil, we've actually caught up on most of those. So
Really?
Over
Well,
the
we've done
past
4. We've got another 8 or 9 that have
I
to
think
be done.
we've done more than 4.
Really?
So yeah,
Great.
I think we're just about caught up on those, which is, I think we have 2 more big ones that significant dollars. But from a resident standpoint, there's nothing more important than be able to
Flush the toilet.
get the sewer pumped out of your neighborhood. You don't want a pumping station is very important. Residents may not know it, but they are very important.
Praise the Lord.
Worthy of spending money on.
Okay, let's talk about water. I'm a conspiracy theorist, as I've told you before, regarding the MWRA. I think the lowering of the Pfas standard was a conspiracy to force us out of being independent, water independent, and into the MWRA system, along with many other independent communities, so we can, shoulder their debt. That aside, where are we in terms of providing certain levels of independence in the water, the MWRA connection, the PFAS production at the reservoir?
Well, just to be clear, Phil, I think the town had started working towards the MWRA well before the PFAS issue, just from the standpoint of the Vine Brook is the groundwater, and as we know that we've had some industries over the years that have provided contaminants to our groundwater. As you recall, the 1,4-dioxane was the previous problem we were dealing with. So the move to MWRA went on well before PFAS. So MWRA, we hope to replace the Vine Brook treatment plant as we move forward. We had hoped to finish up a very difficult project for the residents of Lexington, and kudos to that community for allowing us to build a pipe down one of their busiest streets. I know it hasn't been easy over there for the town administration, but they've been great partners to us. I think we came up a quarter of a mile short from meeting in the middle, where MWRA actually had a project moving our way, and came up a little bit short. So we hope to be able to finish that project early in the spring. What that will do will be able to provide us with an additional 3.5 million gallons per day.
Which would almost equal our entire consumption if that were necessary, correct?
Correct. During the normal months, not during the summer months. So once we get that connection, that's from Arlington to approximately the Adams Street area, we will be able to cover the town. There's one more link included in the project, and that would be to take it from Adams Street down to about Mall Road. And what that connection would allow us to do would be able to provide all the town's water in the event of an emergency without the mill pond.
Okay, but the mill pond we kept for redundancy. What is that capability from a production standpoint?
The mill pond works just fine during the winter season.
Right.
It's the summer production that is the real issue. You know, we have a lot of residents that take great care of their properties, and people love their lawns, and so summer consumption is a totally different animal for us. And our intention all along is to keep the mill pond, because we do agree with you. Having redundancy in the system and having the ability to make our own water is very important moving forward as well. There has been emergencies in the MWRA over the past 10, 15 years where their system went down. And we felt all along that we wanted to maintain the ability to make our own water at the mill pond treatment plant, just as, again, a safety precaution. It'll allow us to decide which water is least expensive at any given time and alternate between the MWRA line and the plant as needed. So we fully intend on maintaining mill pond going forward.
Are we in a perpetual water ban, however, going forward? It seems we're at the mercy of the MWRA. We can't have access to their water unless we follow their dictates relative to usage.
That is true, and that is true across the state. So when the state's in a drought status, we will be forced to maintain water bans. I think from what I can see going forward, they won't be as drastic of the water bans we've had the couple years where there was no watering. It'd be more to the typical odd, even watering, and most of the experts say that is fine to maintain a lawn in the way that the residents want to. So I don't consider that to be too much of a burden, the every other day watering. As you recall, the past few years, we're in a situation where we may run out of water due to the drought. Everybody saw the Mill Pond Reservoir.
It looked like a prairie, not a reservoir.
Well, again, at some level, we needed that water to provide to the residents. So that's why that was a real water ban. I mean, if we didn't get some luck with some rain in the fall, we made it through the summer. But if that had continued much longer, we were in danger of actually not being able to provide water to the community for drinking and bathing and all the important things that people use water for. So that's why we had such drastic water bans the past year or so, is we actually were in a position where we may run out of water.
Right. As a lot of other communities were as well.
Correct.
So what is the status of the pond at this point? I know we fill from the Shawsheen. That's our primary source. Based on what I see in the golf courses, the rivers are up in any event. Are we filling at this point?
Yes, we're filling. So we're in a much better situation up at the mill pond in terms of residents probably noticed the water levels rising. We still have quite a ways to go to actually fill that, and it's a big reservoir. So we're getting there. We're hopeful that over the winter season we'll be able to fill that to the top out of the Shawsheen. And again, the Mill Pond plant was the area where we had the Pfas in the Shawsheen River. I'm very grateful to the community. I have never seen this town take such quick action to spend $15 million to retrofit that plant. So,
well, just review for us the strategy that was employed at the Mill Pond to get this underway so quickly. The filters were necessary. I think charcoal filters were necessary. What were the three parts of the program? We talked about this with Director Sanchez.
Yeah, we had to build an outbuilding. Again, it was we had to receive the cooperation of elected boards to permit the project, which they did in record time. We got the support of the Ways and Means Committee, Select Board and Town Meeting to authorize the $15 million for the solution. DPW did some very creative things, understanding that there was going to be a rush on these filters because many communities were dealing with the same issue as us. So there's only so many filter manufacturers. So they got the ball rolling on purchasing those filters before we even put the construction part of the project out to bid. Very creative and very thoughtful and very forward thinking. We had hoped to have the whole entire project online here in December. But we've been delayed a little bit due to slight supply chain issues and hope to have the solution in place by February at this point. So we're looking forward to that, and I know that many of the residents are. And again, we appreciate all of the support and cooperation we got from all of our elected officials on moving that project forward. I tell people all the time that I've never seen a construction project proceed so quickly. So the residents understood the importance of taking care of this, and they acted very aggressively to do so.
Well, it put us in the front of the line in terms of providing the product. It was so quick that we didn't have a year and a half delay, which was predicted as far as buying the filters because everybody needs them. Correct.
And we, quite frankly, it was a surprise to find PFAS in the Shawsheen River. We expected it to be down in the Vine Brook because unfortunately that's just the nature of that underground water supply. But it was a little bit of a surprise to find it at the Shawsheen. So we acted very quickly once we became aware of it. And again, record timing on that project.
Let's take a brief segue into snow. Snow is a major component of filling the reservoir. However, it's also a primary problem on your side. How are we set up for snow removal this winter? It's been a problem in terms of contractors and employees filling the staff. How is it going to be this year?
Well, as everybody knows, because everybody's seen the sign in every community they drive through, everybody's looking for snowplow contractors. Our Public Works, started experiencing this problem, several years ago, and they made the decision internally that we need to sort of focus on ourselves for snow operations. So they've ramped up their equipment there to provide. So all of our Public Works and Rec Maintenance employees would have proper equipment to plow the town. And we feel as though that we're in a position now to handle any snowstorm internally with the limited contractors that we've been able to attract. And, the only thing the residents may notice is it may just take a little bit longer than it has in the past. But we'll get the job done, and they've done so the past few years with very, very limited help from independent contractors. And as everybody knows, you can't go anywhere in the state. The state's looking for them. All the neighborhood communities are looking for them, neighboring communities. And again, great foresight from our Public Works Department in recognizing that this was going to be a continuous problem going forward. And they've done a good job to ramp themselves up so that we can take care of ourselves in a snowstorm now. Again, it just may take a little bit longer. As you know, we do the sidewalks after we get the streets safe. So hopefully the residents will be patient with us, and we will definitely get it taken care of. It just may not be as quickly as it had been done in the past.
Now, a big win for you from the executive standpoint was the construction of the rec barn, the DPW barn. Again, that happened, a good portion of it happened during the pandemic. At this point, you're fully up to speed, except a few punch lists, et cetera. How did those projects go?
Those projects worked out remarkably. On time, on budget. We do have a couple punch list items on the main DPW facility, particularly related to the outside wall there, that on the curve behind Coles. I think that's one of the final things. But overall, so happy that our hardworking rec and public works employees finally get a facility that is worthy of their efforts. Again, another great benefit, all this expensive equipment that we have, dump trucks and sewer trucks and sewer vectors. These are $400,000, $500,000 pieces of equipment that had previously been stored outside.
In the backyard.
You know, now we're going to have them in a garage. It'll extend their useful lives. Both of the facilities are gorgeous. I know you've visited both of them. We're very grateful, and I'll also say that the facilities that we had been working out of have been functional over the years, but they were borderline deplorable.
I can attest to that. Anecdotally, Tommy Lee just retired after 35 years in service in the DPW department, and I was on the Board of Selectmen when we hired Tommy, and I can remember saying to him, you know, that the facility down there is a little in trouble, but we're going to have a new one pretty soon. It only took 35 years to do it.
Oh, that's record time for government, you know. Really, you know, public works folks, they're used to, you know, public safety. Everybody focuses a lot of attention, and our public safety departments are incredible. But public works are first responders as well, and if you ever have an emergency with your water line or your sewer line, you'll understand how important the work that they do is and how quickly they get out there and handle things. So it's great for the community to see the value in public works in our recreation maintenance department, and to provide them with a facility that is appropriate for their type of operations. It's going to serve us for many years into the future.
Well, let's segue into the last miserable facility in the town, which is the police department, which, as I've mentioned on the program a number of times, I went to school in the Union School in the 6th grade, and it was already ancient at that time. I think it's 127 years old at this point. You have taken action to begin the process of replacing that facility or moving to a new location. What is the status of that project?
We're getting very close to having a consultant on board that would do a feasibility study. One of the things that they'll do is they'll try to determine what's an appropriate size facility to make sure it can house all the operations that we currently perform at the police department, size-wise, space-wise. Once we do that, they'll also consider a couple locations in town. The existing location, you know, one that comes to the top of my mind is the Vinebrook Treatment Plant, which we'll be decommissioning, you know, in the next few years, which is actually a pretty good site as well.
That's a big site, but that building is 60,000 square feet? Not that you would use that building, but
I don't know how many square feet it is, but you know, it's down on the Turnpike, so a lot of the land backs up to the aquifer there. So it's probably size-wise less than it looks, but it's a good chunk of land down there, perfectly appropriate for a police station of the size that we're looking for. They'll also consider alternate locations as well. Are there any potential land purchases within the area where we would like to site a police station? And you know, we're looking forward to getting that process started.
Well, the predominance of crime is in that region, I would think, and also from an emergency services standpoint, accidents, etc.
It's interesting. Many people would think that, but I do believe there's a fair split between the commercial section of town and the residential section of town.
Don't say that our residents are committing crime.
No. I'm thinking specifically of ambulance calls and things of that nature. You would think that most of the calls come from the commercial district, but it's a fairly even split between that and the residentials.
Now, let's switch over to staff. We've had a number of retirements, a loss of a lot of institutional knowledge. You know, somebody in the DPW for 35 years, for instance, has seen a lot of comings and goings in sewer and water, etc. And we've had, you know, in the fire department, the chief going out there. How are you finding replacements? What does the employment picture look like in the municipal government?
Phil, I have to tell you, I believe that this is one of the greatest threats to the town moving forward. People don't grow up and say, I want to be a building inspector. You know, it's just all of us, myself included, you know, I'm an accountant by trade, and you just sort of fall into these positions as you move forward in your career, and you become aware that, you know, local government does have positions in a variety of different areas. But, people just don't grow up wanting to be a COA director. And that's starting to be reflected in the workforce. I've been very happy to see many of my coworkers be able to finally reach that retirement age. There's been a ton of them just in my brief tenure as town administrator. But I am increasingly concerned about our ability to attract and retain the top employees that we need. If you think about this town and the type of activity that goes on in this town, we're so different from other communities. You just can't, in a quiet place where I live in Stoneham, a very smaller community built out, they don't have the type of economic development going on. They don't have lab buildings being built on a regular basis.
150,000 square foot buildings.
They don't. Just think of some of the public safety things that we've had over the past few years. We've had a plane crash. We've had a atrocious hazardous waste thing that was a loss of life in one of our restaurants. So it's a very complex place. So you just can't get an average run-of-the-mill person from another 28,000 population community because they're not like us, and they haven't had the experiences that are needed that we deal with on a regular basis here as a normal course of business. So I think that's one of our biggest challenges going forward. I hope that before I retire that we come up with a way to attract and retain. It's also a problem of there's just nobody out there. In the time that I've been here, we've lost our building inspector, assessor, treasurer, DPW director now. I just appointed my second fire chief, a police chief. These are all exceptional people retiring, and it's just more. When I came to the job, I think I was in competition as a town accountant with at least 7 highly, extremely qualified people for the job. I'm very grateful that I was chosen for the job. Over the years, those people are just not out there. They're in the private sector. They're making far more money. The younger generation, Phil, as I'm sure you know, they are different. They will not stand. They jump around for jobs, for better opportunities. I think in previous years, when you had a job, you were settled in. Many of our employees that recently retired have been here for many years. The new generation looks at employment differently. It's a part of their life.
They're fat, dumb, and happy over an economy over the last 10 years that's been extraordinary. So nothing like a good stiff recession to bring them back to reality. But be that as it may, another component, as you mentioned, about Burlington being extraordinary is most communities do not have 300,000 or 400,000 cars and trucks and hazardous chemicals and transportation of various things going through their community with Route 3 North, the gateway to the northern kingdoms, and 128 naturally.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And again, I just do find that less and less young people are getting into the municipal field. And again, we offer a variety of different expertises that are needed. And from what I've seen, it's become very difficult, not just for Burlington, but for all communities to hire these different expertise. And moving forward, I do see it as a threat. And we've gotten great support from the select board. We're going to address this in a variety of different ways. In some ways, it'll be restructuring departments so that there's a hierarchy. So we're essentially training our next department head for when one retires. In some cases, it's going to be improving on, paying benefits. I know that's a difficult thing to say to the residents. We've begun that conversation with the Ways and Means Committee, but, our wages have grown a little bit behind the curve. And this extends down even into our clerical positions, you can't get CDL truck drivers, we can't get water treatment plant operators. And it's not just Burlington, it's been the other communities as well. And when I look at it, we don't just need any person, we need exceptional people that we've grown accustomed to having run our departments over the years. And a different level of expertise, a higher level of expertise is needed. It's a very complex place. It makes it an exciting place to work, but again, as a town administrator, it's something that I'm greatly concerned about going forward. It's just
now, do we have an intern program? We've put on interns in the past that we have ultimately hired full-time, have we not?
We have, particularly in the engineering department and the MIS department over the years. And I'm glad you brought it up because that's another thing we're considering is to try to, how can we get some college students in here that are sort of in these fields and just open their eyes to the
Possibilities, sure.
possibilities and municipal aspects of it.
Right.
So
Certainly, from an engineering standpoint, as Sanchez has said, and Tom Hayes has said, the variety of different challenges that are faced from an engineering standpoint, are great. I mean, who knows what's going to happen next?
yeah, and again, I think the engineering department is one of those places where we have been able to our new director, Brian White, started out as an intern in the Public Works Department for engineering. So it does work.
Yeah, he's been
so
with
that's
us about
definitely
24 years, I think, right? 22 years, Brian went?
I think a little bit before my time, so
Yeah,
probably
24.
closing in on 20. But
Now, let's move on to the issue du jour. One of the issues du jour is the Route 3 changes that are being promulgated by the state. Where are we in that process? I know they've had a couple of public hearings. They've taken public input, quite a bit, by the way, rightfully so. What do you see the problems are there? What is the solution? When and if is it going to go forward?
we're still in discussions with the state. Residents may notice that we do have some traffic counters out there. One of the big issues that was raised during the public information sessions was that the traffic counts were sort of originally taken during sort of a COVID downtime, which is a pretty big flaw.
Right.
And I'm very happy that the state is going to be taking another look at those. They do plan on having an additional public information session, not to rehash the whole project, but definitely to try to address some of the residents' concerns. As you know, it's a state road. The state is mandated now, particularly through some of the federal money that they receive and the state laws themselves, is not to just look at roads for cars anymore. We need to consider all levels of modality, pedestrian impacts, bike impacts, bus impacts. So they're really looking at roads in different ways, and you can see that in road projects that have gone on in other communities, neighboring communities, where they're starting to look at the roads that we just can't look at them just for automobile traffic anymore. They have to be bigger picture than that. I know it's...
Well, it does seem kind of ridiculous, though, that we're making changes for maybe the 15 or 20 bicyclists that may use Route 3 during the course of a day. But be that as it may, Bill Ricker's had this in place for several years. And I have mixed emotions about it. I'm against it on one side. On the other side, I tried counting the curb cuts, for instance, from the Woburn line all the way to the Bill Ricker line. And I got fatigued from counting them. There's so many of them, which brings into question the idea of two-lane highway when you have people egressing from a curb cut and cannot see that outside lane. So it's a very dangerous situation. So do you see that being the ultimate solution here? Is it going to be one lane?
I do. I think that's the direction the state's moving into. On a personal level, I do believe that is safer. I do believe it'll cut down on accidents and it will be safer. I'm glad you brought up Bill Ricker, because Bill Ricker, section of 3A, recently did the same thing several years ago.
Right.
And I do believe at the outset there was a little bit of traffic congestion caused by the change. But ultimately, you've driven up there now. It's fairly routine. It hasn't resulted in permanent additions to traffic. I believe the state had calculated an approximately 30-second difference on the length of travel under their new configuration. They have assured us that they have very high-level traffic modeling software, and I think a lot of the problem on 3A is caused by cut-through traffic. People coming from the north trying to get to 128, and Middlesex Turnpike has been greatly expanded over the past several years. Folks from Bill Ricker should be trying to use that instead of 3A. And Route 3A and 3 itself has expanded over the past 20 years to 3 lanes in each direction as well. So
well, I have stacking lanes and the various important lights and things of that sort, which
every
take the problem.
Every intersection remains 2 lanes. And again, I'm not a traffic engineer, so I don't understand it all, but Our experience with what happened to Billerica is that, yeah, it may cause a temporary disruption while everyone's figuring it out, but hopefully.
Now, you mentioned Middlesex Turnpike. Which part of the tri-party agreement there? We funded part of the Middlesex Turnpike expansion. It seems as though we've given a construction company down there like a 10-year annuity. When is this thing going to be finished?
Oh, we've been out of it for years.
Oh, we've been out of the funding, our end, yeah. But when is the thing going to be finished because it dramatically affects our traffic. You cannot drive through there at certain periods of time during the day because they're still trying to widen the thing. I mean, this is going on, got to be 10 years, isn't it?
More. I think the project was just in its infancy, 17 years ago. It had already started, but, they're moving their way up, and I think they're pretty close.
Well, they've been confounded by having a river there, certainly, that has affected
and again,
the expansion.
It's outside our borders, so I haven't put too much attention to it. But again, I do drive up that area once in a while. It looks like we're almost there. I know the changes that had happened on the Burlington end of the project, I think, have been, that's worked out really well. Sliding the road over, cutting through near the Mitre Field there. I think those have been positive versus.
Network Drive turned that Middlesex Turnpike 62 intersection from an F to almost an A by diverting the Network Drive traffic.
Absolutely, and as I think with that old Middlesex Turnpike, there wasn't any opportunity there land-wise to do the widening. So
right,
I think that's been a very positive benefit to us. And 20 years is a very short time in the lifespan of a municipality.
Right.
We've been around for a couple hundred years, and we hope to be around for 1,000 more. Right. So it's a blip. It seems like a long time to us humans, but it's kind of a blip in the age of the town.
Right. Now let's talk about economic development. The director has been on. I think Melissa Tentakoulis has been on 2 years now. 2 full years.
Yeah, she started right before the pandemic.
Right.
So.
2 full years. How would you characterize her performance in general and her results in general?
She's amazing. I get so much positive feedback on the work that she's doing. What I've learned from Melissa is we, as a community, we really need to think big and come up with be very bold, not to be afraid to ask for what we want as a community. Right. And I think her vision, I'm amazed by the efforts that she does, the amount of bases that she covers during a week, from small businesses in the center to dealing with Oracle on, when their employees are coming back. As you may know, she's spearheading a relook at the Mall Road 128 development area, and it's going to be an effort focused in on making that state-of-the-art well into the future, again, to attract businesses. We have a lot of underutilized parking areas in that area, and it's really exciting to reimagine what that could be in terms of mixed use going forward.
Well, do you think that's part of a transition from the bricks and mortar of retail? I know Davidovitz, I forget his first name, is a nationally known retail financial analyst who says that places like the mall, 50 to 60% of them in the country are going to be vacant in the next 10 years. Is this part of a transition that we should be exploring in terms of mixed use? Should there be residential components in these buildings? Should there be residential components on the parking? And is this part of gentrification of Burlington in terms of high-end development of those types of things?
Well, first off, I want to say that always one of our primary concerns is what's happening at the mall. Melissa's in regular contact with the mall management. We're very thankful that it is one of the premium malls and will maintain its status as one of the premium malls in New England.
Highest revenue I think in the country, one of the 10 highest.
It's right up there. It's really exceptional, and it's one of Simon's premium properties that they own, and we expect the mall to be vibrant well into the future. Just to start off with that, they've started doing some creative things down there, as you know, that they've implemented more. What do they call that? Experiential type experiences. They're hoping to attract different types of exhibits to bring people in, whether it's a museum, whether it's mini aquariums, and as you know, that they've gone into restaurants. So they've done quite a lot of work to keep the place vibrant. Moving forward, I think the sky's the limit for that, not just the mall, but that entire area. And again, I don't anticipate that we're going to be requesting that apartment buildings be built there or anything like that. There may be some form of mixed use.
Well, there has been isn't there been a proposal that was floated by Macy's to put some sort of housing back on that back parking lot?
Yeah, but it would be part of a larger. Again, Macy's owns their end of the mall. It would be part of a larger picture, and I don't think any of us wants to see just apartment buildings, just thrown up all over town. And that's clearly not what the residents want. But we do feel that there is a certain level of housing that makes these overall development work, and particularly with, the change in the work from office. More people are working from home. These folks are out, having neighborhood coffees and bringing their laptop down to work from, shared spaces. And I do believe that some level of housing will definitely make that district more vibrant going forward. It'll be the kind of housing that the community wants, though. And again, I think we have a very vibrant housing partnership now working to try to determine, what type of housings. They just did a needs assessment, and something in between single families and giant apartment buildings is definitely.
How are we doing on housing? I know we're above the state mandate, well above the state mandate. But do we continue to run into the NIMBY situation? For instance, there's an over 55 project, I think, down in Windermere with 7 or 8 units that are affordable out of 24.
6 out of 24.
6 out of 24, which is a pretty substantial amount. And the whole thing is 55 or older, so that would be certainly classified as not elderly housing, but older housing, less likely to make an impact in the school system. Yet we seem to be picking up a lot of resistance to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a natural in any community, Phil. If you have a nice wooded lot in your neighborhood, and everyone would like to see that maintained as a nice wooded lot, that's human nature. I'll just say, not speaking to that project in particular, but just on housing in general, is that we do have created what's considered a housing leader within the state, the town of Burlington. Another thing that we're noted for. What we found is that affordable housing sometimes isn't that affordable,
Right.
So someone who wants to downsize from their home and move into an apartment, they're looking at $1,800 as affordable for a one-bedroom unit, and saying that's not really affordable. Right. And again, some of it is breaking your habits and taking the time to set back and be like, well, I won't have a landscaper bill, I won't have to pay someone for snow removal, but more ownership opportunities, I think, is what's desired. We do have a lot of affordable apartments within the community. As I think we're over 13%, which is excellent.
Right. Well, that leads up to the question: if we've given enormous development benefits to Nordblum, for instance, for Davis, et cetera, in these huge projects, yet none of them address the central component of the housing problem for Burlington young people who want to make a stretch by and get in for a one-bedroom condo or something that they can own and build equity so that later on they can move out. We don't have any of that type of housing either now being presented or even on the drawing board. What do you see happening there? Is there a solution coming out of the housing partnership for this?
Well, I know they're working very hard on it, and again, we just got the housing needs assessment, so I'm actually excited to hear what their recommendations are going to be moving forward. But again, I do think that many people, they may want to downsize and pass their home along to a young family, but they want to own something. It's
right.
Our generation. You just if you've never rented, the thought of moving into something that you own to something is a rental is a little scary for a lot of people.
Subject to a landlord. That's
yeah,
right.
Subject to a landlord, and even under the guise of the affordable housing regulations, I think that we've done a great job with it, but it's still a very difficult problem, not just for us, but for the entire state, because we do need really diversity in demographics as well. We need people of all income levels to be able to afford to live in Burlington. It makes the whole ecosystem work. So,
Now, let's go back to economic development and talk about life sciences. We've made a headlong rush into the life sciences acquisition business. And this is reminiscent of a couple of efforts Burlington made in the past. In the 60s, we made a industrialization revolution. In the 70s and 80s, we did a computerization revolution. Both of those turned out to be fatal to our water supply. Now we're going to the life science business, which is, you know, not only does it have carcinogen possibilities, but it has pathogen possibilities. How concerned are you? How confident are you that we're not repeating mistakes of the past in terms of allowing these uses into the town?
well, the first thing I would say on that, Phil, is that these industries now are highly regulated on a level that, you know, I don't even understand how many regulatory authorities have oversight over these. But my most confidence comes from our Board of Health. We have a top-notch Board of Health. They have done an unbelievable job of managing these type of businesses moving into town. In fact, they've developed safety regulations that have been copied by many communities in the state, and they're used as a model for other communities that are, you know, attracting life science and laboratories. So I have the utmost faith in the way that our health department under Susan Luminello and our elected Board of Health has handled this. We couldn't be in a better position than anyone in the state, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, the only caveat I would apply to that is Pfas was supposed to be an expert, and he's over there funding, you know, pathogen research in China, spending American money. I suppose that's a good idea, so it wasn't done here and killing Americans, which it ultimately did. But the latest Senate report feels as though that was the source of this Wuhan.
Well, just the other thing I would add to that, Phil, is I believe that there's 4 levels of lab, just in terms of the types of things that they deal with. I believe, and again, forgive me if I misquote this, but I believe in my last conversation with Susan Luminello, we don't have any labs that are higher than a level 2, I believe. So the labs that are coming in here are really science-based and very safe, highly regulated, and again, Board of Health has just done an amazing job.
I think Dr. Weiner has made that point as well. Let's talk about changes in government briefly. This was brought up at the Board of Selectmen meeting, I think, Select Board meeting recently. What do you see? You know, this has been our form of government since 1970. The previous form of government was from 1799. How do you feel about how it works? You've been a player in this for a long period of time. I don't think there's been a situation where you've ever felt as though there was really a logjam or any kind of a barrier to effective government. What changes, if any, do you see might be made?
I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to just look at the structure in government, and many communities do it almost every 10 years. It's a requirement as part of their charter, just to take a look, see how things are set up, see how they operate. We don't have a great structure in terms of triangle type, corporate type structure here. We have a lot of independent bodies that are in charge of departments. I believe that we've made it work because over the years, because of our personnel. We've had great town administrators, we've had great department heads, we've had great elected officials involved that all have the town's best interest at heart. So we've been able to negotiate that. I also believe that because of our beneficial financial position, we've been able to satisfy everybody in terms of financing, in terms of what they needed. We're never in a position where we're going to town meeting and asking them to decide whether we need another teacher or another firefighter or another police officer. We try to satisfy all the departments to give them what they need to operate, which I think is something that has allowed us to avoid conflict between our different bodies and different departments and different elected officials. So I think it's a worthwhile thing to look at. There is, you know, if you were to look at it, it's a pretty odd structure that we have here in town. Very few communities still have it, maybe Wellesley. And if you think of the commonality between us and Wellesley would be that we both have very excellent budget for different reasons.
We got money.
For different reasons.
Right.
So, you know, I'm perfectly happy maintaining the job under the current. I knew what I was getting myself into in terms of this, and I know that we've had Bob Mercier and John Petrin before me, and again, a host of other great departments and great department heads and elected officials that have all worked towards a common goal. But it's worth a look.
Well, let me give you a little kink in the process. It's the first time I've ever seen it. I've been in town government since 1970-something. First time I've ever seen it where we've had the legislative body dictate to the executive the hiring of personnel. That happened for the DEI director in the school department, which turned out to be a colossal failure. Have you seen that before in your career?
Not really.
No.
I haven't seen that in my career. Again, you know, we'll move forward together, and
Well,
I'm sure everything will work out.
I should have brought that up earlier so we could elaborate. But one closing note: we've run out of time. Unfortunately, I can't get your play on the Celtics. That brings the program to a conclusion. Again, it's been Year in Review 2022 with our excellent Town Administrator Paul Sagarino. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Phil. Happy holidays.
You too. Thank you and good evening.